So this question is asking about barriers to entry, which really just focuses on what prevents new entrants from entering a market. Because there's the existing players, and certain characteristics might either encourage new entrants or make it very difficult for new entrants to actually enter that market. So we'll go through and see which of the following is not considered an effective barrier to entry. So on the first one, an existing firm owns the resources and supply chain. So if one firm owns all of the resources and the supply chain that are needed to produce the product or service for that market, well, isn't that going to be pretty difficult for a new entrant to come in and be able to gain access to those resources or that supply chain? Because without those resources and the supply chain, how are they going to make it, right? So that is definitely an effective barrier to entry, so it's going to be incorrect. How about economies of scale are present in the market? So first off, we need to know, what are economies of scale? Well, it basically just says the more volume you have, the lower the cost per unit. So think about it in terms of what is needed to, get a business off the ground. If it's just a little online business, then you probably just need a website. But if you're trying to produce an airplane, well, that's a whole different story, right? So if economies of scale are present, that means that there's a lot of upfront cost that's needed just to produce one product. But then if you want to produce tons and tons of product, well, the cost per unit goes down. So as you can imagine, that is an effective barrier to entry. So that's going to be incorrect. How about an existing firm in the industry was granted a patent for a product or process? So for every market, right, it's going to be based on a product or a process. And if it's patented, that means that nobody else can make that product or that process in the same manner. So if one firm owns that, that's definitely a barrier to entry, right? How would you actually make the product if you're not allowed to because it's legally protected by a patent? So definitely an effective barrier to entry, so that option's incorrect. How about economic profit margins are high for existing firms in the market? So if economic profit margins are high, well, that is not an effective barrier to entry, because what that means is that somebody else can come in with a lower price and still generate a profit margin that makes sense for them to enter that market, right? So that isn't going to be an effective barrier to entry. Actually, that encourages new entrants into a market, and eventually it'll become saturated and competitive. And then, there won't be any point for a new entrant to come in because there's really no room to make a profit, right? So that is going to be our correct answer here, because it isn't an effective barrier to entry.